go. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. I am very happy to welcome you again for our Smart Tribe talk. And today we have a very nice guest, Kirsten Ehrlich. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. You are calling from Florida?
Yes. Mm-hmm. It is not a sunny day for once. It's actually a little cold and rainy. So I feel for everyone in the winter across the world.
Definitely London, yes. Well, Kristen and I have been speaking for a while. We are also part of a different networking group for women entrepreneurs. And Kristen is, she's running a very interesting Ethos Coaching Group and has heaps of experience, which leads her to be the master talking about art of conversation. You have experience as a lawyer, and you have handled one of the toughest conversations in law and business with mergers and acquisitions, right?
Yes, I started my career out in consulting, working in mergers and acquisitions, primarily on the tax side. A lot of tough conversations when, companies buying a business. Is it a good deal? Is it a bad deal? So I definitely know what it's like to have tough conversations. And also as a practicing attorney, people come to you in a time of need, and really being able to have meaningful and in-depth conversations are extremely important.
And what you're doing right with your coaching group, you're supporting other entrepreneurs.
Yes, I primarily work with entrepreneurs and people transitioning kind of post-career into retirement or a new career, making those kind of transitions or growing their business into selling their business. And I do mediation between partners as well, and then some educational workshops and things kind of all on the same topics.
So it fits very well because most of our audience are transitioning as well from academia to industry. So right by our alley. And today our conversation, and together with the audience, because as usual, we will have time for questions. It will be exactly about the art of conversation. Mm-hmm. And the three main components, pretty much: how to start a good conversation, how to make it meaningful, and then how to make out of it a relationship, how to make use of it, right? Mm-hmm. So my first question is to start, what are the practical ways to start a good conversation? Especially we are doing this in a digital way. We are talking to someone we don't know before. We just arranged the meeting, of a Zoom or something, never seen the person in life. We don't know the body language. So it's very different when you meet someone, bump into meeting at the conferences, when you can actually see someone and have this kind of vibe. But how to start the conversation?
Well, I first want to note that there is something really powerful and unique about having these remote and online conversations, because you're getting access to people and conversations that you might not have had before. Maybe you wouldn't want to have pulled someone out of a big group to have the one-on-one. So this is a great opportunity in a way to take it for what it is, even if it's more limited than an in-person conversation. And also you get to prepare. This is the key thing, I think, in starting a really good conversation, especially in a platform where you're networking with a purpose, whatever that purpose is. Maybe it's to do a new project or move to another industry. You get to research the person a little bit beforehand, learn about them. What are they publishing? What are they doing? LinkedIn is out there. It's a really easy way to sort of learn a little bit about them. And you also have a little background profile on them, right? So you get to know a little bit about them more in the beginning. And that sets the tone for a really good conversation, because people are impressed when you know about them, know about the important things that they're doing, because they put a lot of hard work into those things. And I know it's not always easy to find out that stuff, but when you have the opportunity, that's a great thing to do, prepping for a conversation. And then kind of on that same note, something that's important to do is sort of write down your thoughts of the things that you really want to learn from this type of conversation. So it's not just a hi, nice to meet you type of conversation. It's an actual, sort of knowledge and finding conversation with the type of information you want to know. So if you write down a few, quick questions, the kind of topics you want to discuss, it's really great to have them beforehand. And on the same note is let the conversation still be fluid, in that if the person ends up being a little different than you anticipated, maybe you need to throw out that sheet of questions and kind of go on to something new. But that's a really helpful way to kind of prep. And then ice breaking is kind of what it is. No one really likes ice breaking. I mean, the common thing is talking about the weather, just like I mentioned here in the beginning of our conversation. That's a nice little icebreaker. Or talking about the platform you're meeting on, or talking about what you're doing, asking them how they're doing. Worst comes to worst, you bring up a corny icebreaker. One I've heard recently is, what's the object right next to you and what's the color of your shirt? And that is your superhero name. And for me, that's my phone and gray. So phone gray would be my superhero name. I don't know what's next to you, Beatrice. What do you have on your right and your color of your shirt?
Yeah, I have my phone, which is a blue and
okay.
And green. There you go.
A lot of probably phones and superhero names. But, you can mention these little things, if you really have nothing else. I think if you can start the conversation off light and with something innocuous, it makes it a lot easier. Or if it's mentioning something that you found out about them, like, hey, I just saw that paper you wrote when I was, looking up who you were before the conversation. And it was really impressive. I really liked how you did X, Y, and Z. And I think actually that sort of level of detail makes someone remember you. They're not going to forget a person who actually read something that they put together. I think that they won't. I won't forget it. So that's sort of my advice with, that initial conversation and ice breaking.
It's true. It's very often the best conversation are with good listeners, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So when you learn about someone, it's when you listen. Who is that person, and ask questions about them. It's not usually, I'm doing this, well, I'm doing this. It's much more rewarding to have a conversation, more asking questions. And so that's a very nice way to start. But how to turn the conversation into something more impactful?
So I think by first having those kind of questions in mind, that's important. But the beginning of a conversation generally with these type of first networking is going to be the first 10 to 15 minutes. Hey, you tell me about yourself. I tell you about myself. So we get to learn from each other more than what's on a piece of paper or on a website. That part of the conversation is really where listening and asking really pointed and in-depth questions, or asking for explanations of something they brought up that you thought was interesting, that will help make the conversation deeper, and it will allow you to have maybe the conversation you really want to have about something else that's on your mind, because they'll feel valued in the experience and that they're more invested, and because you're invested in the conversation. I mean, you can really tell when someone's just sort of waiting to have their turn to talk rather than actually paying attention. And that makes a big difference in the conversation. And listening is really easy. Anyone can do it. You can listen to what someone says, ask them a question about what they just said. That's an easy way to build on a conversation very simply. And it's not a super hard skill if you really take the time to do it.
So basically having conversations in business, you prepare yourself like doing a business, right? Because we talk about having something meaningful, impactful. We come in prepared. So we want to get out something from the conversation, right?
Absolutely. If you don't ask the questions that you actually want answers to, you're never going to get answers to those questions. And people are here to have those type of conversations. I mean, that's why you show up, and there's a reason that they showed up as well. They probably have questions that they want answered. So, there's a mutual dance here, and it's just being respectful to kind of not just go for the jugular out of the gate with the question you have, even if you're really dying to ask. Really get to know them first and then ask those type of questions, because you'll have a much better kind of response relationship. And they might feel more vulnerable and able to answer those questions kind of more honestly and give you more feedback than they might have, someone they don't really know. Yeah.
That's something which I know many of our people on Smart Tribe struggle with, especially the one in academia. Coming to a conversation with the industry, a professional, and actually turning this into a kind of business conversation. Well, I'm talking to you because I want to find out how is to work in your company, or can you recommend me, or whatever. It is okay to ask that, right? It's those are the questions that people expect you that you have some ask from them. It's not just a social conversation. There is a purpose.
I think that if you do it tactfully and there's always reading the room, right? If bringing it out of nowhere when you're talking about, the color of the sky is not probably the time to ask about it, but directing the conversation in a way where, you're at a point where, there's kind of a conversation lull, you have a question, just say, I really had a question about something I was interested in. I really like your company. I, really want to know what it's like to be, a director level. What do they do? Tell me about it. And then what do you do? Tell me more about like the nitty gritty of the details. And that allows you to have more business oriented conversations where they're kind of telling you about themselves and they're kind of telling you about the company. Rather than more of a job interview. This isn't a job interview. This is, a conversation with networking. So if you ask them about their experiences and what it's like, and maybe how they got into their position, what did they do? Because yes, it is great to have someone directly refer you somewhere, but that's not often how people get jobs, or it's not how everyone will get a job. So knowing how someone did something, how they accomplished it, or maybe it's not their story, maybe it's their colleagues or friends who came from academia and moved into the business world, how did they do it? Like, take this as a time to learn about different approaches, jot it down as you're talking if, that kind of feels appropriate for you to remember. And that way you have a bunch of evidence of different ways to kind of tackle it and multiple things to do rather than just one path.
There are some topics which are more difficult to talk about than others, talking about colors, whether it's easy one, but some topics are quite sensitive, for example, about financial matters or salaries increase or things like it, or how can I get on the list of, whatever. How to ask those questions?
I think if you first start by doing some basic research, it's really helpful. Depending on what country you live in and what your field is, some of this information is really transparent already, but in other places and in other industries, it is really not. And it's a best kept secret of, who's really making what kind of position you want to be in, what level matters, what the titles mean. That can sometimes be more hidden. But, there are a lot of outlets out there to do some basic research, ones like Glassdoor, where you can at least see a range of something. And, I think a fair question is to say, I'm really interested in this type of change, but something I'm concerned about is, what life would be like monetarily after leaving academia, because it provides other benefits, right? What that would really look like. And I saw the pay bands look like this, or the position I really want to be in is this, or how you get in is being on this list. Ask that question in a broad way by offering some information, what, let's say that pay band is, you make 100 to 120,000 USD, and that's what I saw is out there. Is that kind of what you think is right in your experience? And then they can answer. And it's not the same question as, what do you make? Because no one wants to answer that question. It's kind of uncomfortable for a lot of people. So most people find it easier to respond and be like, yeah, that kind of seems reasonable, or, oh no, that's way too low, that's way too high. So they might not tell you exactly the information you want, but you can get a roundabout. And I think that, maybe that's all you're going to get out of some people. And then some people are open books. They will be like, oh no, I make this down to the penny. Here's how I got in. And you'll be shocked. You'll get both sides of the spectrum, but you really won't know until you ask. And I think it's better to tread lightly, because when you tread lightly, you have a broader array of answers versus if you ask someone really directly something that they're uncomfortable with, they'll kind of clam up in their shell. So that's a good way to approach that type of information. And also that's another thing with timing is, sort of time that in the conversation once you know them a bit. It's not the icebreaker. Tell me about the salary at your company is not what someone wants to first talk about when you first meet each other.
So saying someone on a hello, can I send you my CV?
Yes. And people love to help. Like if someone feels valued, they're going to want to read your CV. They'd be like, I really think that my CV is looking pretty good, but I'm just not quite so sure, and you'll be surprised. Someone will offer before you finish that sentence who's interested, in doing that. And don't be afraid to finish it yourself. Right. And ask, the worst you're going to get is no, I'm too busy, or like, yeah, I'll do it. And then it goes in, some side inbox that they never really check. And you can't control the outcome of the situation, that it's going to happen and that someone's going to do something for you, but you can at least ask. And I think if you ask and then you also reciprocate the ask, be like, is there anything I can do for you? I have a friend who ends conversations with, what can we mutually do for each other? I really want to make sure that this conversation was impactful. If there's anything that you need, even if it's not right now, or maybe a connection I have that would be helpful, let me know, because I'd appreciate if you could send me X, Y, and Z type of business, or help with my CV if you ever get a chance. And maybe the answer is no, maybe they don't have something, or maybe they haven't offered to look at your CV and they're just not going to do it, but you won't know until you have that kind of conversation.
And if they say no, don't take it personally, because it's nothing personal, right?
Oh yeah, no is never nice to hear. No one wants to hear no, but people who are successful at making particularly bigger leaps get so because they ask. And I think that we all have an assumption. I think particularly in the academic world, I know I'm sort of an academic myself in a certain way. I've been through a lot of schooling and I really respect that world, is that we expect that when we do good work and we're a good person and, that we're impressive because of our achievements, that someone will just offer us something. They're going to say, oh, like, you're so great. I really, like all the stuff you've done and you've been really impressive. I'd like to offer you something. And that can happen, but most things require asking for it. Most people who get things get it because they said, this looks like a really good opportunity. I think I could pitch in and I can make an impact. That conversation is how things get done in most of the real world. You don't usually get offered stuff. And if you're getting offered stuff all the time, then that's really awesome. And I want to congratulate you. But, that's not the general experience out there.
That's such a good point. You need to ask. The art of asking probably is going to be our next webinar. Sometimes people feel intimidated by networking, talking to strangers, and how to get around that.
I think that to remember that you're both in this conversation, likely the other person also does not necessarily want to just network to a camera and start talking to someone they don't know. They're coming to the situation just like you are. They have things that they want to learn. They have a reason that they're showing up to the conversation. Hopefully that takes the edge off of intimidation. And particularly on, platform like Smart Tribe, is that you're coming from two different worlds. And I think that both sides can be intimidated, right? You're on the academic side and you might be intimidated about the business side. And if you're on the business side, you might be intimidated with some of the academic research and the knowledge that comes there. And you might feel uncomfortable. And I think a really easy thing to do to help fix that in some instances is to remember that most of us who work and most of us who are also in academia have like a certain jargon we use all the time. I work for some big companies and, there's just little things that you just slip out, these little acronyms that, you know what they mean and all of your colleagues do, but most regular people wouldn't understand what it is to, if you can, take that back, take it a step back and try to speak in a little bit of a plainer way if it's not a common jargon. And then also remember to ask questions. If there's something you don't understand, there are, I hate the word stupid, but there are no stupid questions. The question, if you don't know what something means because someone says, M&A, for example, like M&A means mergers and acquisitions to me, but, in a different part of the world that may have a completely different meaning. It might be like marmalade and, I don't know what A would stand for, but something, and it really wouldn't make sense to the person. And I'm having a conversation talking about M&A for 30 minutes and they're like, what is she talking about? Not cut someone off bluntly, but say, oh, I just had a question. What does M&A mean? Can you explain it? And someone will be happy to explain that. And that sort of levels the playing field a lot on an intimidating sort of playing field, because you can have conversations more impactfully because you both understand it. They get to explain it. Most people like to explain what they do if it's something they're excited about in particular. So it also gives the time to bond and create better conversations.
On our platform, very often academics are leaving academia, either still or still students. However, they are adults, right? Because doing PhD is not not the graduate. And we had a situation, and the industry people are often a little bit older, more experienced in professional life. And there is a little bit imbalance, not a peer-to-peer, but a little bit. And I'll give you an example. Some time ago, we had a fantastic match with a young scientist. who was working, just finishing her PhD in oncology, and we matched her with a lady who is head of R&D in one of the biggest pharma company on oncology for Europe. And she did not actually reach out to her and even responded to her because she was just scared. How to imbalance, how to not to be scared and not to be worried that you're talking to someone who is more senior, more experienced, or has a big title.
Well, someone who's more senior, first off, they started somewhere, right? We all start somewhere. And no one gets to a position of seniority, particularly at like a large company, where they haven't had to build up their career in a process. And along the way, even mentoring others, like they have people working underneath them. They know how to have conversations, hopefully, with people below them, and they know what sort of to expect out of those type of conversations. So reaching out to them shouldn't be something that's intimidating, because it's not something that they're not prepared for. You know, they're ready to have a conversation at maybe the level that you're coming to. And then I think also, you know, that person is available. They've made themselves available to have a conversation with you. And it's funny that you bring this up. My husband the other day brought up these, I don't know if you've heard of flaming hot Cheetos, right? That there's the story of how they began. And flaming hot Cheetos, supposedly, I haven't researched this, so you can Google and check if I'm correct, who's ever out there, started because the company sent an email out and said, if anyone has any good ideas of what to do with our product, everyone at this company is valued. And a person who worked on the maintenance staff took home one day a bunch of unflavored Cheetos and was like, there are no hot Cheetos. Like, he noticed, like, there's really nothing in the brand. And so he made flaming hot Cheetos at home. He emailed the like CEO of the company because he said he was available, and they had a conversation, and they literally created a brand of like very famous snacks, right? And that kind of, the CEO apparently was really impressed with the initiative and the, you know, gumption there of this person who probably had really no conversations with him before or her before. And, you know, that sort of shows like what can happen when you take risks. You don't know what's going to happen. I'm sure that person didn't really expect the CEO's words to really mean what they did, but the person did mean what they said, and they took the call or the conversation, and something really great came out of it. So I think that that's a little like lesson on a grand scale of what could happen when someone is offering something to you, someone really senior, when they're offering a conversation. Take it. I mean, you know how rare it is to be able to get access to someone at a really high level at a company. You know, people are out there trying to, you know, bombarded by emails, trying to get those type of conversations, and you're being offered to it. You know, really don't look a gift horse in the mouth, really kind of seize the day. And even if the conversation doesn't end in a, hey, here's a job, here's flaming hot Cheetos out of it, you know, there are positives that can happen. You can learn from them. How did they get to where they've been? What kind of struggles? What do they wish that they would have done differently? I love asking that question. Like, when you look back, is there anything you wish that you would have looked at differently, or anything you would have approached differently? Because that really is such valuable knowledge. I mean, I have that in my own career of things I wish I would have looked at differently when, you know, when I mentor someone, and, you know, someone more senior than me has it, and you can take it with a grain of salt. It's really great to have a bunch of different perspectives, so you can kind of run all those through your own filtering system. But, you know, I wouldn't be intimidated. They're offering it up. Like, grab the ring. You know, you never know what can happen.
Yeah. I can just add my 2 cents to that. I've been working with executives in different companies through my career. And the other component is that they do want to know what other people think, because usually they're being briefed by the manager, mid-level manager, or other people who work very closely with them. But they do miss very often, and they miss input from other people, also from outside. So they do actually welcome those conversations with very different people on the different levels.
Yeah, I mean, they learn a lot from getting different perspectives. Most people who are in senior leadership positions have gotten there from acknowledging that their mindset isn't the only one, and there's a lot of value, and especially in age gaps, because, you know, think about the difference in how you grew up and in technology and all of those things that you're learning at a level so early on. I think like coding is an example. When I hear people joke about how they used to learn coding, you know, 20 years ago versus how someone learns coding now, it's like so many steps ahead. And so they see so much potential there in how you think and how you evolve. So I think that, you know, your perspective is really valuable. because you're growing up in a totally different way and environment and learning different things than they ever did because of progress. So there's definitely a lot of value.
The other challenge we often find is exactly two different words, people having conversation between academia and industry most of the time. So two different mindsets, two different languages, approach to life, to work and everything. How to make those conversations work?
I think starting off by the verbiage, asking those questions when you don't understand something, I think is helpful. But I think at a certain point, acknowledging that you are different from someone else and that you may just have a different perspective, but knowing how to take that in and learn from it. Maybe, someone works, 90 hours a week, and that seems to be the main priority and focus of the conversation and how they build their business. And ask questions, learn about it, but it doesn't mean that you have to take it away. Just because you ask about something, you learn about it, it doesn't reflect on you. You don't have to own it and consume it. You really can still be your own individual person by still learning. And I think that allows some of the gap of a different sort of mindset from each other that you might have in academia. And I think also trying not to be confrontational. I feel like that's something that's important. I know that sometimes when you get a question that kind of like rubs you the wrong way, it can be really easy to feel attacked. And I think by, taking a beat and kind of reprocessing the question, maybe asking it back, tell me what you really are asking. Is it about this? And that way you can kind of calm down a little bit, because I know that can sometimes happen when you're from really two different worlds. You kind of get your hackles up. If someone's asking about a type of research maybe you're doing and it seems like they don't really get what it is and you put all this work into it, it kind of can get frustrating, because they're thinking about it in the business side. But I think if you ask some pointed questions to kind of clarify, that you hopefully will create a better conversation than, the automated response you might have had, which kind of might have shut down that conversation.
Very important is to follow up, right? It's not
Yes.
just to make the conversation and to go through the conversation, say, oh, nice talking to you. But part of the conversation is following up, and it's a hard one. How to do it, not to come across that you're imposing, that you're bothering someone, that you want again something from them. How to do it?
It's really hard and it's important. What's hard about it is that people, let's say we're talking about the industry side who you're emailing, they're going to get busy and swamped up by work. Like everyone, that happens. And you tend to have the priority be work, and they might not be great at answering the more personal type emails. So I like to, send an email after a conversation, maybe that day, maybe the next day, and say, it was great connecting. I just wanted to, say X, Y, and Z. Maybe there's something that came out of your conversation that there's a follow-up and that you're going to work on. And sort of keep them in your back of your mind. And if there is something to do that related to it, follow up again in 2 weeks, like a 2-week timer I put on my calendar sometimes, like, hey, I'm going to reach out to X, Y, and Z if I haven't heard back from them because they said they'd get back to me. I mean, you have a timeline maybe in the conversation, maybe defining that in the conversation. If they're going to do something for you, what's realistic, like in a month, people are really busy. So, a week turnaround might not be practical for a lot of people who are in industry. And then sometimes, if I make a connection and they're just not a connection that we really have anything going on right now, I'll set a 6-month timer. I'll put in my calendar, in 6 months, contact X, Y, and Z, a little bit of notes about our conversation. Maybe I'll include our little email chain from the beginning, and I'll reach back out to them and say, hey, I was just thinking about you. I wanted to check in. Maybe I'll send an article that I found interesting or something else to sort of keep them in your mind, because you might not have value for each other right now of something that you really need from the other person, but you never know when, someone leaves a job and they need to hire someone and be like, oh, I remember that person, she or he was really thoughtful. And, they messaged me not too long ago. They're now on my mind. And if there's also anything else that you're like publishing that's important, maybe that's a time to reach back out, be like, I really thought that you'd like this. I just wanted to send you my latest research, kind of keep yourself important. Reach out on LinkedIn if you haven't connected already, so that you're in their newsfeed. There are a lot of ways to kind of casually keep contact, even if it's not immediate. But don't just be the person who has the conversation and just shuts the laptop and, never emails them again, because if someone's busy and they're going to do something for you, they might not do it if they don't feel like you're invested.
Yeah, probably good good practice is to be the first one to follow up. Don't expect the other person, even it says, I will follow up, you do that. Don't wait, right?
Yeah, I think that you can't, I mean, I think taking your own initiative is where you're going to get the most out of it. It's like asking the questions, right? You're not going to know the answer to something you don't ask. So, if you don't follow up in the beginning, then, you're not, you're creating a relationship where you're not taking the initiative, and you might not get the things out of it that you'd like. And I think also just to remember that, like, no one owes you anything, right? So when you do follow up with people, that is a sort of casual relationship. You're not in a business relationship at this point. And to keep in mind that, maybe they're going to fall off. Maybe they're not going to be responsive. Maybe, the relationship won't go anywhere, but you can still be you. You're showing your value, because that's all you can control. You can show up and be the type of person you want to be and put yourself out there. And then it's just kind of up for them to appreciate that. And if they don't, then, that's their loss, and you can move forward and keep building other relationships.
Yeah, you never know, sometimes people just forget, and, but the first thing they do when they are promoted and becoming managers, the first question is, I have to build a team. Who do I know? Right? And
yeah. Yeah. I mean, when people need to hire, people hire their friends or their colleagues. I mean, and another thing is to think about when you're making these connections is, if someone's not a perfect match for you, something that you could possibly offer is a connection to somebody else. I love when people make cross connections, and that builds way better relationships, because now you're in like a web. Before, you're just pointing to each other, and now you have all of these connections here, and it's much better connection situation. And you might get a cross connection from somebody else, doing something like that. So to think about when you're having those conversations, if something comes to mind, like, oh, hey, I realized in your conversation, you said you were hiring for X. I know someone who's really good at that. I should introduce you if you'd like. And then, see if you can set that up, because that will also help build the conversation and the connections in a lot better of a manner.
And my last question, because I can see the questions are coming up already from the audience. Very nice. So please keep sending. So step further, from how to make long-term relationship from that one conversation.
Well, I think that that's where the connecting other people comes in, because that really helps the long-term relationship, because then your conversation point isn't just between each other. I have, someone I've networked with who, sends me things they think are interesting to help build my business, and also sends me questions I have on, my knowledge base. I used to practice in the area of tax, so sometimes I'll send little things. And I really appreciate when he sends me things that I'm interested in, or sends me providers that I might want to talk to. And I try to do the same in our relationship. So it creates a way where all of a sudden you don't know each other just directly. You know each other because of, Bob, Sue, and Anne. That actually creates a much longer term relationship. And if you can't do that because it's just not practical, I think just the simple, following up in a consistent and kind manner really creates the kind of best relationship you can have. And not just following up in an email. Part of that might be, hey, like, I'd love to grab a virtual coffee and chat with you about what's going on, because someone might just be really busy and they'll just answer an email and say, oh yeah, things are great. It's kind of like when you ask in a grocery store, oh, hi, how are you? And someone just says, good. But that's not the whole story. There's probably more going on. There's a deeper level there. And if you actually enter into a conversation, you'll discover a lot more what's going on, and that relationship will build, and maybe start having coffee every 6 months or every 3 months, which is really nice that you can do now, because of virtual technology out there. They don't have to be, your next door neighbor to have those conversations, and you can really build a much longer term relationship by doing that.
Very good. Thank you so much, Kristen.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to read out some of the questions coming up.
Okay.
First one, I am going to read that question. Why not? Yasin is asking, I wonder if you're going to answer that question. Tricky one.
Okay.
Here we go. Can colors predict our personality?
Oh, I don't have, while I know a bit about the human brain, I don't know enough about psychology to do that. I know, I don't know. I'm sure there are certain colors that make you more profitable, right? Isn't green and red, I think, makes you more hungry. So
I think was a question following our conversation, what colors of fonts we have. from Carlos, how to tune both persons' purpose into action?
I think you can ask questions that you want to know the answer to make them more actionable. So an example of that is if someone says, you ask, oh, do you know anyone? I'm interested in meeting someone who does X, Y, and Z because I think they'd be important. And they say, oh, I know X, Y, and Z. Okay, so that's the response. How do you make that actionable? Actionable would be to say, oh, do you think that you could set up a meeting with them? And they might have to think about that because they probably have to reach out to them. And then when you send the email that you're going to send after your call, you say, I really enjoyed our conversation. I'd love to meet X, Y, and Z at some point if you think that you can set it up. And then send an email in 2 weeks, right? If you haven't heard back from them, following up on that. That's creating some purpose and some direction, or asking about timelines, how long someone will think something will take. Because if you get a definition and you don't leave it open-ended, it will create much more purpose. But I think the best that you can do on your side is if you say you're going to do something, is show up and do it. Because that will show someone that you're invested enough that they're going to actually take time out of their busy day to do something for you.
Thank you for that. Question from Krish. Are there any effective ways to communicate with dishonest and manipulative people?
You can't control. There are some really great people who are very good at saying things that they think you want to hear. And you can't control that, right? You can't control what they say. I think you can ask the underlying questions. If they, say, trying to think of like what exactly someone might say that's manipulative, because it's not really in my personality. But I do know, in dealing with, like, let's say the law, right? Practical lawyer skill here is to ask, it's all about asking questions, to ask questions that dig deeper. Someone says something like, oh, well, my company does X, Y, and Z. We could really use your work. And then they give you really vague answers about what it would look like to work with them. Ask pointed questions about, well, tell me more about what the compensation would look like. And then they're like, I don't really know. Tell me more about what the equity would look like. I don't really know. And then you can ask, have you ever done anything actually like this? Because maybe there's a big error that this is the 6th company that they've put together. Well, no, I really worked for those companies. I really didn't do it before. And say, well, do you have an attorney to do it? Ask the direct questions, because those are the conversations that matter. If someone's manipulative about, their charm or something that you really don't care about, who really cares? But if it's about something that is actually you're putting investment into, you should ask direct questions. You should I will say, always get your own attorney when you're dealing with other people to really get to the bottom of things, because the last thing you want is to enter into these really wish-washy relationships where you didn't ask up front, how much you're going to be working, like how many hours are you putting into this project? Are you putting in your own money? You should know all of those things, because that will cut through a lot of the dishonesty. And also asking people for evidence of things if you're going to get into that level, like, show me the bank account, show me the corporate documents, like ask all these complicated things. I know we're going on a kind of law tangent, but that's where I can say, like, how to cut through at a really important level is asking for evidence. Don't be afraid to, cut through someone's sort of fluffy, words, and ask pointed questions about really what would make up that. And if you need time, I also will say this, say, let's table this conversation. I want to do some research and come up with some things I would like to ask. Let's have a conversation in 2 weeks. Because I think that a lot of times we feel pressure to answer and to, agree to something. And if someone is really good at being manipulative, that's like their time to strike, and just say, wait, hold on, let's take time. And if someone won't give you time, I think it's showing that they're probably not the right person for you. I mean, there are probably very few things that can't wait a week or wait a week or 2. So I hope that is helpful in cutting through it. I don't know, a pure technique.
We have a question from Abhishek. How make great first impression on people, on senior people in industry, other than just starting basic questions like for elevator pitch, like really member to memory.
So it's really hard to know what someone will be impressed with. I have a connection who is a very senior person and who gets emailed a lot. And he said that something that will make him respond to emails is when he actually gets a pointed email that they can tell that they've read about him and they have a particular interest in him more than just his title, right? That, he's X, Y, and Z at somewhere. And that really will impress him and allow the door to open. There probably are things in a conversation that might pique someone's interest. We usually bond with people that went to similar schools or have similar hobbies than us, but it's kind of hard to predict that outside of maybe looking on LinkedIn and you happen to go to the same school. That creates some nice connections. But outside of maybe knowing a little bit about them in a way that's appropriate, you don't need to know shouldn't know their dog's name before you meet them. That might freak them out a little bit. But to know, some basic things, those type of connections will start hopefully making them impressed. But I really think knowing about them and what they're doing and bringing it up and why you're impressed with them really helps, create a better relationship, especially if it's little stuff that, like some obscure article that they publish that you're impressed with that hasn't gotten all the claim. I think people really love that, not the one that was picked up by Fortune, but the one that, is on their blog, because then it means, wow, they really went into it and like really know what I'm doing, not just the big puff piece that, was printed and it comes up on Google. So I think that stuff is really helpful.
Oh, we have some similar questions coming up. So obviously a lot of people think about it. How to start a conversation and ask for a job, but actually not ask for a job. How to ask for the work. That someone is working in this company and they are hiring and gosh, it would be great to have a reference from this person, but this is the first time I'm talking to him and her. How to do it, how to ask that question, but actually not.
It's complicated because it would probably depend on how valuable a relationship you built based on your initial conversation, because it might be something to table for the second conversation. I noticed I said to ask questions right away, but there might be a little bit more of a rapport that you need to build depending on how, the first half an hour of the conversation is gone. I think you can bring up interest in the company and start learning about it and say you'd like to talk again by the end of the conversation to learn more. And then maybe that's the time to bring it up. Maybe things are great from the beginning and they seem to be offering that type of information and they feel comfortable asking in the first conversation. It just takes some skill to learn when's a good time to ask. But I think that if you say, I noticed that X, Y, and Z is hiring, and it's something I'm really interested in. Do you have any advice, going the advice angle, and of how you got hired, any advice about how getting in? And then someone might naturally offer that, because this is a really brand new relationship. And you really have to gauge for yourself if you want to be the person who asks for recommendation from someone you just met, because someone might not be comfortable with that, honestly. It's not, but they might be comfortable after, a few conversations introducing you. It's kind of a really new, kind of brand new, soft egg relationship, and you really have to treat it carefully. But someone might offer if you just start talking about advice, because I'm a pretty friendly person. So if I know someone, say, oh yeah, I know someone in HR, I'll email them about you. You sound great. There are people who will do that that are out there. And I've had that happen for me and it's been great, but that's not everyone's kind of personality and approach to just offer something. So it might take some more time and then asking that conversation and in a further conversation, not right in the beginning. But it's really for you to gauge how the conversation's going. But I do think people will offer, people want to help out people, right? Like it makes them feel good. I think it makes me feel good to help out people. So I assume, but, and some people just are not going to be the type of person that recommends, but they might give you advice on how they got there and how they got in, and, you really need to work on X, Y, and Z in your resume and things like that. Or here's the recruiting manager. The hiring recruiting managers, I think, are really important connections. And that's actually what I would ask for more than a recommendation, is say, do you have any information of who the hiring or recruiting manager is in the company? Because reaching out to that person and getting a conversation there, especially because you don't know this other person that well, that might be a more fruitful thing to do rather than ask for a recommendation that they don't feel comfortable giving.
It's a very good, the trick of not asking directly for something, but for advice works with everything. We're currently fundraising, and the way how I'm approaching investors is not about, can you invest in us? But it's about, could you advise who to partner? So this question, how to advise me on something, but actually I want something from you. It's a perfect approach.
Yeah, it's complicated because you do get to a point where when it is something you want, you got to ask, like you got to go for, I really feel like we bonded here and that like I could really be valuable. My company's really valuable. I think that if you're interested, I'd like to see about what you could offer as an investor, right? At some point. But an advice angle is a really great way to start getting conversations going.
We have a question from EM. Can you describe what is an ideal attitude to bring to a conversation? Impress, listener, assertive, collaborative? Seems like a difficult balance.
It is. And I think, partially you have to remember is you need to be yourself in these conversations, and that you have certain strengths. And I think that we can all learn other strengths, right, than we have. But that to not be pretending to be someone else, I think is more important than, an actual balance and all those things. Because yes, you need a little bit of everything. And I think really, listening is important, and also asking for what you want is important. And maybe there's timing of it, of building a relationship first, listening, kind of having those conversations, and then being assertive where you need to, where you think that there's an opportunity to ask something you really want to know about. But play to who you are. I don't think that you have to change. I mean, yes, you're going to have to speak to someone if you normally don't like speaking to someone. That will be something you have to work on to kind of have a conversation. But allow people to get to know you and your uniqueness and what you really offer. I think that that's a really important way to be memorable, sorry, wrong word, memorable. Because, people meet a lot of different people, and I feel like we're all put on a little bit of a facade when we meet someone new. And I think people remember more of the individual who kind of, made a joke or told a story or kind of made an off the cuff remark about something, where you got a little bit more intimate with each other. Intimacy meaning, learning a little bit about the true person. I think that's a really important thing to at least bring a little bit to these conversations. That authenticity, I think, is really probably the key thing I would say overall that is important in a conversation.
Kristen, you have a consultancy background, the same as me. And what I found the practicing actually really helped me to have a better and better conversation and be an ease with that conversation. Actually, even having fun, because being a consultant, you have to jump from different type of clients and companies and different level of managers and people you interviewing, talking to. So over time, talking to different people more and more, it became basically something natural. I don't know, how did you find it? But practicing, maybe it's a good way to get used to. So network as much as possible, even with your peers, to get better, and then have the good conversation with people who could really influence your life.
Oh, absolutely. You can practice your listening and conversation skills anywhere. I have a friend who has a really cool technique. English is his second language. And what he'll do is he'll listen to music in English and he'll pay attention to the words. And then he'll go back and look at the liner notes to look to see if he actually was paying attention, if he knows what the song was about. And it's really helped him in his listening skills. And then he practices with regular people, like asking pointed and thoughtful questions, listening to what someone else does, in line at the grocery store, wherever is appropriate in a non-COVID world where we can have conversations, that you can practice those skills. And I think a lot of the skills that I learned in order to have better conversations with people, started with like my first jobs, like I waitressed and things like that. And I had to make small talk with random strangers, all day, every day. And, that really helped build being able to talk to people kind of from all different walks of life and be able to have an easy conversation when first meeting someone. So there are ways to kind of practice this type of stuff that's not really practical. You're not really, practicing. But also if you're really insecure, and especially because these are video, is maybe, practice your elevator pitch if there's something that you really want to pitch, and record it, listen back to it, write down what you think's missing, change it. Don't become too rehearsed, but I think it allows you to hear yourself and how you talk, and maybe what you'd like to learn, about yourself and what you're saying. I hate doing that type of stuff, so it's really always a challenge to do it. So I'm not saying something I easily do, but I definitely do it. I think it's really important to kind of know how you're coming across and maybe what you're missing, like what you're not saying. And you can even use like recording services like Rev.com, I think is one of them, where you can send off a little transcript, to actually see what you, or actually read what you said. So things like that are pretty helpful.
That's a very good point. I never listen again to our webinars. Don't like to listen to myself. Oh, this is a good question. Can you, do you have some tips to guide junior people, such as maintaining tone, patience to answer all the questions, etc.? This is a really good question. I came across some places, I don't know, particular maybe to some cultures, where people don't listen to the end, and they just cut in. It was just so unnerving. So, any good tips how to manage that?
So I hate to admit this, but I was terrible at this. And what changed me a lot was actually when I got my coaching training after practicing law for a number of years. I was realizing I had a really uncomfortable time listening to a big gap of silence. So if I asked a question and someone was thinking, I would want to just start talking, to fill this awkward gap because it felt uncomfortable. And then, and part of coaching training is to really allow someone to speak and express themselves fully and to listen to them. And I was bad at it. So I suggest just starting by asking questions in regular conversations, and maybe with someone that you're usually having difficult conversations with. I don't know, maybe that's a parent or a sibling, where you're maybe cutting them off a bit, to allow them to really speak and listen and see how that changes the dynamic of the conversation. I think that a lot of us are in a rush. It's, maybe a personality issue in some aspects, or where you grew up. I grew up in the Northeast, so I'm much more quicker than some people in the South. I want things to move. And I've learned a lot about myself by challenging myself in that way. So allowing silence is really a big thing, and allowing someone to finish. And I think that you can come in the conversation, because some people do like to just explain away and not answer the actual question that's asked, and say, oh, can you hold on a second? I really would like to hear X, Y, and Z, or I was more asking about this, because you have a limited time, right? If they're going to tell you a 3-hour story about their dog when you asked, about like what their, what's on their laptop, like, you might not want to hear that for the entire conversation. You have other things you want to ask, and sort of reining that in politely, as politely as you can, is a skill, and it takes some practice, but just practice in everyday life and how to do that.
We have a question about, can you share experience of the conversation during business meetings between business people, between lawyers and mergers? How different it is between the conversation with academia? How is the talk between, business to business? Is it harsher, faster, down to the point, or is it very similar to everybody else?
It is different. I think that lawyers in particular, and a lot of business people as well, depending if they're on opposite sides, tend to come in, they have a lot of partisan bias, right? Because they're like, my side, it should be the winner. My term should be the best. My X, Y, and Z is the best. So depending on their attitude, if it's more adversarial, then, it creates conversations like down to business, like just the highlights. And I notice people really don't ask maybe some in-depth questions. They kind of make assumptions, and they're going to research later about what maybe that meant or didn't mean. And I think in academia, people tend to maybe ask a little bit deeper sometimes of those type of questions, because, the underlying research matters more in the whole conversation that they're having, I think that can happen. And I think academia maybe has a little bit of a slower pace because you're not up against tight timelines, and in mergers and acquisitions work, there's always a timeline. That's everything's due yesterday. And that it's really important to remember that that's the mindset they have. And they might not be used to a slower type of conversation. But I will say that you can reframe that. I know that when I notice I'm running a mile a minute, if someone kind of paces me down and asks me some pointed questions about some things I said, I will, slow my roll, right? I'll kind of get on a little bit of their level. And I think it's kind of like you come to a nice pace. And I think also in academia, remembering that just because something may have societal value and is important to you in your research and what you're bringing up, it doesn't mean, it's not that it's not important, but it doesn't mean that someone in business will immediately get that. They probably have an angle of something that's important, and appealing to that angle in a way that makes sense will really pique their interest. And you should think about that when you're having the conversation. If they mention, they're really interested in using your type of research in X type of industry, don't have a 40-minute conversation about, some other great use of it. Talk about how it could help them, about what new and innovative thing it could do, how they could approach it differently. What's like your MVP, your minimal viable product proposition? My brain is a little off today, but what's your product? What is that you're offering? And how could you do it differently and with what you're offering than what they currently have?
Yeah. One tip is, I can say from the industry perspective, for all academics and scientists out there, use the advantage that people from industry will like you to start with. They will have respect, they will like you, and they will have some soft spot to you. And so even they might come across a little bit harsh and just go to the point, but to use this to your advantage. I've seen very often when we outreach to industry people say, hey, you want to join Smart Tribe and you want to talk to academic scientists, and say, yeah, sure, who wouldn't want to talk to such interesting people? So you have already something, advantage while talking to industry people. But the difference, it is different. I mean, I can see myself by talking to a lawyer or to one of our Smart Tribers. I'm much more softer and interested in what people say. The lawyer is just down to business.
There's a thing in law. It's a way you analyze problems and where you put the rules and everything like that. But basically, one of them is that you put the conclusion up front and when you analyze something. And I think lawyers and business people really like that. So if there is a conclusion or something you're actually offering, like, hey, like what I'm doing really matches X, Y, and Z markets, that you do, say that up front. Don't do the 20-minute conversation, showing how you got there. Say that up front and then back into here's your issue, here's why I'm valuable, and then come back to like, hey, I'm valuable again. And here's how I can help solve the problem, because that's helpful to them, because they can, they might say no off the bat, but it also prevents a really kind of long detour because you only have a certain amount of time to be with them.
Yeah, very, very good point. The same way how to start the emails, the first sentence should be what actually am I asking in my email. Not about at the end, right? Then people will start reading or not, depending on the intention. We have time for very last question.
Okay.
The time fly.
Yes.
How to have a great relationship in today's remote or virtual meetings? If you can some tips, these are very different, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, and probably will stay there for a while. And it's not just probably with new people you meet online, but even with your colleagues, how to maintain those relationships virtually.
That is really complicated because certain people, I think people are getting fatigued by video calls. So it's kind of complicated. I think that if you're with someone or you're that person, to remember to pick up the phone, other ways to have conversations that might be a little atypical at this point, or picking up the video call if you're a person who never does that, to connect that way, to kind of mix it up. And also there's some kind of cool platforms coming out that are allowing some different kind of socialization out there that, you can meet in different kind of groups, not just like Zoom, obviously we're on Zoom, but there's some other ways where you can kind of pop around and network in a little bit more social ways. If you do some research, you'll probably find a few coming up. Those are really nice because you can have shorter conversations, more like at a cocktail party, and then pop over to meet someone new. So attending those type of events, if you're organizing them or encouraging maybe your employer or your company to do them, that might be helpful to allow kind of more casual conversation rather than, hey, we're just here. Here's a round table of questions for everyone to answer, which sometimes can feel uncomfortable because it feels like you're at work or at a job interview, and it may not be as natural in building an actual connection to someone, talking about your day or something simple. So I think kind of employing all of those different ways, I think, are helpful to build stronger connections. And I think also just remembering how burnt out we all are due to the situation, and having some sympathy and empathy that maybe response times may be different than they were before. Maybe people are a little less focused. People are stressed out. really get that, and maybe don't write people off in a way that you might have earlier as being not interested, because it's a really difficult time for, us as humans all over the world. And I think having some empathy or sympathy in those conversations, and maybe just checking in casually on them, on those points that have nothing to do with the things that you're asking for, are really helpful ways to build connections right now, with each other.
True. In empathy, this is something very important, I think, grew in value over the last months this year, and hopefully is going to stay for long with us. Kristen, thank you so much for the conversation today. This was a very fast 1 hour of chatting. Thank you everyone for listening. This was our last webinar for this year. We wish you all and your families a wonderful holiday and a happy new year. Thank you so much, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice meeting everyone virtually.
Thank you. Bye-bye.